Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing great wherever you're watching this video from. I'm still out traveling, but I wanted to bring you some breaking information on the Coast Guard sniper taking down a narco boat with a 50 caliber weapon. We'll be watching that footage, and then I'll be giving you the differences between Operation Southern Spear, which is the U.S. Navy and the U.S. military, the Department of War, and then Operation Pacific Viper, which is the Coast Guard, more of a law enforcement action. And we'll dive into just the differences between that and why there are differences between that, because I think a lot of people have a lot of questions right now about what's going on with the legality of the boat strikes. So just on December 4th, we had a boat strike that targeted a 40-foot go-fast vessel that was 300 miles off of Ecuador's coast. Intel from a P-8. They used a P-8 Poseidon. I've talked about this aircraft for a long time. Very capable platform, looks like a 737. Its platform identified 4 occupants and confirmed that they were affiliated with a narco-terrorist organization. And I know it's interesting for the public to think about, well, how do they do that, right? It doesn't make a lot of sense for us because a lot of the cameras that we use are really good. We got, what do we got? Like 10 megapixels or whatever. They can literally read a license plate from space. That's how good that their intel is. So facial recognition, and these are things that you probably won't hear anywhere else, but facial recognition is possible even with masks on. I know this is crazy, but because they're obviously going to have masks on, or they'll have some sort of clothing on that might disrupt the face. They can still see through that and identify people, which is wild. I can't get into the details as of why, but the P-8 Poseidon, highly capable aircraft. They were confirming that the occupants of the boat were members of that narco-terrorist gang. The vessel ignored over 3 VHF hails over 20 minutes. They tried 3 different times to hail them to get them to stop. An MQ-9 Reaper launched 2 Hellfire missiles at 14:35 Zulu, sunk the boat within 60 seconds. No survivors were found. There were rough seas. And then Southcom announced on X that the action was described as a decisive blow. President Trump praised the operation on Truth Social. Venezuela condemned it as aggression again. And then Colombia remained silent amid some negotiations that they're actually having with this whole situation, and even probably negotiations with their cartels as well. There's probably a lot of behind the scenes, a lot of backdoor negotiations that are going down. So I'll give you guys a little bit more of the information that I am seeing. So this is actually a platform that I think has been used in some of these drug strikes as well, or could be used in the future, and we'll probably see it here pretty soon. But again, just a quick overview. I'm going to get to this strike here in a second, but I wanted to just give you guys some background on kind of what we're seeing, the overall global talk. Rand Paul, he's saying when a shipwreck crew member loses protection from attack, the attack misses the point. Let's see. The real problem here is the dubious and legally overbroad assertion that the U.S. is justified in using wartime authority against a criminal problem. Well, see, this is so interesting to me because these gangs have been now designated as narco-terrorists, and that information has been released, and these senators, they all know it. So I'm not saying, there are some maybe legally shaky things that need to be discussed, but it's very interesting to me that everybody's pretending like it's a criminal problem when it's been designated as a narco-terrorist problem. So it's actually a terrorist problem, which brings in a whole different set of rules of engagement, and that's called ROE. Fighter pilots fly with those. We have a pack on our leg that tells us, how is the ROE today? Are we allowed to drop weapons in this case? What do we need to drop weapons? So I don't know if these members of Congress just don't know that, or if it's just a political thing that they are doing to get clicks and get their names in the headlines. And then it looks like they're standing up for law and order when really they're kind of, if they want to discuss this and have a big disagreement about it, I'm all about that. Have different perspectives. But they need to have a disagreement about what the ROE actually says, what the rules of engagement actually say. Because when it comes to a terrorist organization, different rules apply. And that's why we're in this video focusing on the Coast Guard versus the Department of War, because there's totally different rules that are involved in that. So I just thought it would be worth bringing up. I'll do a full video on the legality of it, and I'll try not to make it boring. I'll try to make it fun, obviously. That's my goal. Try to make it entertaining. But I'll be doing a full video on that next week. But for this, just a quick overview here, a lot of discussion. I hit on this as well. Former Maduro spy chief is claiming that Maduro has a calculated plan with Russia and Cuba to target the U.S. And this is why. So the intel agencies know this. They pass this information to the administration, to the Department of War. The cabinet sits down and they see like, oh, there's a targeted war with Cuba and Russia trying to flood the US with fentanyl and other drugs. So that's why they were allowed to designate them as a terrorist organization. So that's a little bit of the difference there that gives you the background. And this is why we're going to see this American sniper from the Coast Guard. Freaking awesome. I mean, the Coast Guard having snipers. I knew the Coast Guard was cool, but now they're on a whole new level cool. So this is going to be fun to watch. Let's check this out. This is a disabling. This is not, there's no one dying here. So YouTube, do not demonetize me, please. But this is a takedown of this narco boat. So there it is. Looks like some of the members are, who knows, kind of lying in the middle there. Warning shots are going to hit the water first, is what I read about the strike, and then the boat is good. The boat motors are going to be hit with that 50 cal. Okay, you can see the drivers of it actually right in the back, so they're right next to where that shot is coming in. Wow, very sweet shot from the helicopter. I mean, that's just awesome. Freaking cool, man. Let's see. It is a 50 cal. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, that looks like 50 cal to me. The guns I used were a little bigger than that, but as far as I can tell, that is a 50 cal. It looks really good. So, give you guys some background on that. So, when it comes to these strikes, guys, so overall, the hardware and the gear that's going to be used by the Coast Guard and by the Navy is going to be very different from each other. And that's obviously going to be the case because the Department of War is going to have different assets than what the Coast Guard is going to have. Coast Guard is more of a law enforcement function. And again, that's why we see that non-lethal use of force. Whereas the Department of War, when they have the authorization of the narco terrorist designation, then it brings in a whole different ability to strike with kinetic lethal force and to reattack. But again, I'll get to that here in a little bit. I want to do a quick overview for you guys just on some of the things that the hardware brings to the fight, and maybe a quick overview just of what we've seen in the situation so far. So the U.S. has basically started to interdict those narco trafficking boats, 22 of them, actually 23 of them, since the strike on December 4th so far. And the statistics are 70% of fentanyl and cocaine flow from Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador. So they've basically been able to drastically reduce that. I don't have exact figures yet, but this has escalated since October of 2025 with an executive declaration of a non-international armed conflict. And that's with cartels, and it's under something called Article 2 authorities, all right? Don't worry, this won't get too technical. Trust me, I'm a simple man. I like to keep things simple as well. But all these deployments ramped up over the past few months. So 7 MQ-9s, 2 AC-130Js, 1,200 personnel are said to be at Puerto Rico right now. I'm surprised there's not more MQ-9s, to be honest. But this has evolved, so 80% Caribbean strikes in September to 60% Pacific strikes by December. So now that the Caribbean area is being kind of shut down, there's going to be more flowing to the Pacific. And the Coast Guard is more focused on the Pacific side, but now the Department of War will likely be rolling into the Pacific side as well. And that is just how it's going to go, right? If the routes start getting shut down in the Caribbean, then they're going to start moving to different routes, and they're probably going to be using land routes as well. So the way that they collect this information, the way they collect this targeting data is very interesting. So they use the NSA, the National Surveillance Agency, for intelligence. Those have satellites with massive cameras, capabilities that you just wouldn't believe. And then that persistent surveillance via the P-8 Poseidon. The P-8 Poseidon is a highly capable aircraft. I'm going to pull it up for you guys. It's worth you seeing. It's a unsung hero, honestly, where a lot of people don't really know about this thing. They don't really know it exists, but it looks like a C-130, acts like a C-130, except it has the ability to actually drop weapons itself. This is a weapons carrying bay here. It can strike submarines. It's carrying like strike missiles right here. Those can be anti-ship missiles. Those look like mini Tomahawk missiles to me, to be honest. But the sensors on this thing are amazing. This is looks like a huge optical sensor down here. Just a lot of embedded capabilities in this aircraft. So let's see. P-8. Wow, that says Air Force, but I don't think Air Force has P-8. Sorry, let me pull up this picture. Here we go. Navy. Yeah, so this should be a naval variant. That's kind of cool, though. Interesting. Oh, I haven't seen that before. Cool. I love it. Because again, that's carrying some sort of weapons back there. That's awesome. All right. Well, there we go. That answers some questions there. But again, P-8, very highly capable aircraft. That's going to be allowing facial recognition for these narco terrorists. They can basically nail them down to exactly the type of gang they're in, probably even looking at tattoos. We might start seeing drug members that are now have no tattoos, no teardrops. So again, overall, the chain of positive identification, PID. This is something that I thought about a lot in combat, is the intelligence collection, the PID. It has to be dialed in. It has to be tight. You have to know who you're striking. And that's what our ROE always said. So we don't know the exact ROE in the Caribbean currently, but I can guarantee you that PID, positive identification of friend or foe, is a huge part of that. Warning and de-escalation, that's probably going to be more on both sides, but likely more heavy on the Coast Guard side. But from what I can tell so far, the research I've done, the Department of War actually issues verbal warnings via VHF radio, and they tell people to stop. They use visual signals, flares, low passes, but likely prior to all of these strikes, VHF radios are being used to try to get the boat to stop. But the drug runners, they're not listening to any radio. They might have a radio that's talking to lookouts or maybe some sort of a satellite texting ability for maybe the islands that they're hopping to when they hop to the United States. But they're not going to be up on a radio monitoring a frequency like a ship captain should. They're not going to be following the rules of the sea. So the warning and de-escalation phase will happen. Quick coffee break there. You guys get it. Hope you're enjoying some as well. And then execution and assessment. So lethal force, that means you're deploying lethal munitions, but you have to first assess. So what kind of weapon do you need? What's the skin of the boat? What can be taken down on the boat? And maybe even what's the non-lethal force when you come to the Coast Guard side? And then command and control is going to be involved in this as well. So Southcom Craig Fowler, he oversees from Miami. Craig Fowler, I think, is one of the generals with real-time authority that's delegated to tactical commanders. The strikes occur in international waters, so there's no territorial claims, and basically they're striking narco terrorists. So when it comes to all these members of Congress, I love that they're sparking the conversation, but the whole key is this is legal. It's just, is the ROE what you want? And to change the ROE, the rules of engagement, it takes a lot of JAGs. Those are staff advocate generals, judge advocate generals in the Air Force and the Navy. And they basically help the commanders come up with the ROE. And that's depicted and directed by civilian leadership. So civilian leadership, you can think of like the president, their cabinet, especially the Secretary of War. They are going to be all in, sitting in meetings, deciding on what the ROE is. So if you want to change the ROE, that's a whole nother issue. But again, you have to look at the different systems that are being used to determine what the ROE is, because you've got to have the ability to communicate with them. So you need to have a system like an MQ-9 or something that can relay radio signals as well, so that you are giving valid and legitimate VHF warnings. Hey, stop your aircraft, stop your boat. And then the AC-130J, amazing platform. That could have been up there doing strikes. When I see some of these hits, it could be from 30 millimeter weapons. They also carry SDBs. Who knows? Maybe there's laser guided SDBs at this point. So the AC-130J, I think that's an unsung hero. Might do a full video on that soon, but I think that there's probably some strikes coming in from that AC-130J. And I might as well pull that up for you as well, because it's a beautiful aircraft, special ops aircraft for the Air Force. Who doesn't like that? Who doesn't like a little special ops flying? So that's what this beast looks like. Yeah, you got a good view of it over here. You can see the gun over here on the side. And again, this would be the perfect aircraft up there, just flying, left-hand turns, making it happen. Highly recommend that. This aircraft is just something that's it's near and dear to my heart. I have a lot of friends that have flown it. I think it's an incredible aircraft. A case study. Okay, so December 4th, we had the 22nd strike against a 40-foot go-fast boat, right? So we know that happened. We know that the boat strike happened. So let's just look it up. I can't show the actual footage of the boat being struck, but we can basically see the conversation that's going on. Yeah, here we go. So the boat strike happened, and this one was in the Caribbean, I believe, or it was off the coast of Ecuador, right? So this case study, all right, this is the Department of War striking these boats. So when the Department of War strikes these boats, it's a completely different rule of engagement. So it's not a law enforcement function. Likely it was that AC-130J or an MQ-9 Reaper teamed up with SEAL Team 6, who's probably leading a lot of these strikes. SEAL Team 6, highly skilled operators. There's a JTAC embedded which is a joint terminal air controller. So they're likely right there pulling, giving the clearance for the trigger pullers, who are probably sitting at Creech Air Force Base when it comes to the MQ-9 Reaper. That's an austere base, in the deserts of Nevada, that the MQ-9 Reapers are actually piloted by Air Force pilots that sit at these locations. And there's different titles where the CIA might step in and actually pull the trigger as well, but I'll get to that in a different video. But again, when it comes to these strikes, you got to think about the hammer coming down on the Maduro regime, right? So the boat strikes in the Caribbean with the Department of War kind of pressuring the Maduro regime because they've been ousted, as it's been verified that they have a strategic narco war on the United States. That's a basically stated mission within their inner circles. They work with Cuba, they work with Russia. So that's why you see the Department of War hammering down hard on these narco terrorists. And that's what we see with the AC-130J MQ-9 Reaper. All right. Now I want to step to that strike of the Coast Guard. So the Coast Guard sniper taking down this boat, right? It's just freaking awesome footage. That is cool. Again, non-lethal YouTube. This is a non-lethal strike. So they're taking out the boat motor. That's awesome. What a sweet job. Are those positions open at all? I think that's something I'm very interested in. So I want to give you guys just a quick breakdown on the helicopter interdiction here. So that was on December 6th. So that was helmet cam footage of that interdiction, right? And when it comes to that operation itself, that crew also ignored VHF hails and visual signals. So that Coast Guard marksman fired the 50 cal and disabled it. This action occurred under Title 14 authority, and that permits disabling fire for vessels posing as a smuggling threat. All right. So the Coast Guard doesn't have the lethal force authority. And potentially the Department of War is even passing off what they can't PID, positively identify, as narco terrorists from the Venezuelan Maduro regime. So we're seeing narco terrorists from the Venezuelan regime, and then there's going to be smugglers coming out of other countries, coming out of Colombia, or maybe nations that aren't affiliated with the Cartel of the Suns or the Maduro regime. So with those, likely they're being passed off to the Coast Guard. But in this one, this one's pretty awesome for the Coast Guard. I got to give them props. So they disabled the boat, and then they boarded it. They seized over 20,000 pounds of cocaine valued at $300 million. I mean, that's just insane. They used a couple cents in 50 cal bullets, a little bit of fuel for the helicopter, and a couple hours of salary for that Coast Guard operation. They took down $300 million in cocaine. That's the largest bust in 18 years. And that occurred under Title 14 authority that permits disabling fire for vessels posing as smugglers. And this is unlike the Southern Spear strikes. Again, the Coast Guard avoided lethal force to maintain a law enforcement approach, but they do use some of the assets from the Department of War, and the Department of War passes them information. This is a part of Homeland Security, though, and it focuses on capture rather than destruction. So sinking the vessel would also destroy the forensic evidence, such as the crew statements, and those are going to be essential for convictions. But actually, the Coast Guard prosecutes 1,000 suspects annually. I need some more coffee, apparently. They prosecute over 1,000 suspects annually as a part of Operation Pacific Viper. So different, and I wanted you guys to have that information. Hats off to the Coast Guard. Well done. Keep it going. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Really appreciate you being here. Let's see. I'll probably be on the road for another day or so. Some more videos out of this little pop-up studio, a couple at least, but I'll be back in the studio soon. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you're doing great. We'll catch you on the next video. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner. See you on this video. Signing off.